The receipt was still warm when I realized one small switch had rewritten every relationship in the room. My sister-in-law was smiling, raising a glass, unaware that the bill waiting at the table wasn't meant for her anymore. What she didn't know was that for years, I had been paying silently, and that night, I stopped. Zola walked into the restaurant a few minutes late, heels clicking softly on the shiny floor. The place was bright, expensive, and loud with soft music and laughter. Gold lights hung from the ceiling, and the smell of rich food filled the air. Her brother stood up to hug her, smiling wide. Ebony sat beside him, looking perfect as always, dressed like someone who belonged in a magazine. People often admired Ebony. They talked about her taste, her life, her confidence. No one talked about who made that life possible. The table was already full of dishes, drinks, and excitement. This dinner was meant to celebrate love, success, and years together. Everyone praised the restaurant choice. They said it was classy and worth it. No one asked who suggested it. No one asked who would pay. They didn't need to. Zola had been covering things for so long that it felt normal to everyone else. Bills had a way of finding her without words. She smiled, took her seat, and listened. The waiter poured wine. Plates were changed. More food was added. Zola noticed the prices without looking too closely. She had seen numbers like this many times before. Birthdays, emergencies, last-minute problems, she was always the solution. The family didn't say thank you anymore. They just expected calm to show up when things got heavy. Ebony laughed loudly, telling a story about a vacation they needed to take next. Her voice was relaxed, sure, like money was endless. Zola watched her closely and felt something shift inside. Not anger. Not jealousy. Just clarity. This celebration was built on a quiet rule everyone followed without speaking. Zola would handle it. And because she had never said no before, no one thought to ask now. She picked up her glass and joined the toast. From the outside, everything looked perfect. Inside, Zola already knew this night would not end the way everyone expected. Zola did not need anyone to say it out loud. She could feel it in the small things. When the waiter asked if they wanted to add more dishes, her brother looked at the menu but glanced at Zola first. When someone mentioned the wine was expensive, no one suggested choosing another one. They just waited. Zola smiled politely, like always, because she knew what that pause meant. It meant she would handle it. This had been her role for years. If there was a school fee that came late, Zola paid. If rent was short, Zola filled the gap. If there was a sudden problem, her phone rang first. No one announced it. No one thanked her deeply. It was just understood. Zola was the reliable one. The one who did not complain. The one who fixed things quietly and moved on. Ebony enjoyed the comfort of this pattern without touching it directly. She talked about plans with ease, never checking numbers, never hesitating before ordering. She spoke about their life like it was solid, like nothing could shake it. She never asked Zola if she was tired. She never wondered how things stayed so smooth. Comfort surrounded her, and she wore it like it was natural. When the waiter returned, Ebony added another dish for the table. "Everyone should taste this," she said, smiling. Zola nodded. She always nodded. Saying no would have made things awkward. Saying yes kept the peace. Peace had always been Zola's job. Even in conversation, the pattern showed. When a small argument started about travel plans, Zola stepped in and smoothed it over. When silence grew uncomfortable, she filled it. She carried the weight so others could relax. Over time, this had become normal. Too normal. Zola watched Ebony laugh, relaxed and confident, unaware of how much depended on someone else. Staying quiet. It was not cruelty. It was comfort built on habit. Ebony had never learned to look behind the support holding her life steady. As Zola sat there, she felt the truth settle clearly in her chest. She was not seen as help anymore. She was seen as a guarantee. And guarantees, once expected, are rarely appreciated. The family did not notice how much she gave. They only noticed when things went wrong. And tonight, for the first time, Zola wondered what would happen if she stopped holding everything together. Zola rested her clutch on her lap as the dinner continued. It was a small, neat bag, nothing flashy. Inside it were 2 cards, placed carefully in separate slots. One card was hers alone. It held her savings, money she protected, planned, and guarded quietly. The second card looked ordinary, but it carried a long history. It was linked to an emergency account everyone talked about, but only Zola had filled. Over the years she had added to it again and again, telling herself it was for family, for safety, for peace. She touched the clutch lightly, not opening it yet. Around the table, plates were cleared and replaced. New dishes arrived, richer than the last. The laughter grew louder. Ebony leaned back comfortably, talking about renovations and future plans. Her tone relaxed, like the ground beneath her feet was solid. Zola listened, her face calm, but her mind was elsewhere. When the server returned, he smiled politely and spoke about the estimated total so far. He said the number clearly, without drama, like it was just information. The moment the amount reached Zola's ears, something tightened inside her chest. Not fear, not panic, recognition. She had heard numbers like this many times before. Too many times. That amount reminded her of nights she stayed awake calculating expenses, of moments she moved money quietly, telling herself it was temporary, of promises she made to herself that next time would be different. The number was familiar because she had paid it before, just in different forms. Rent once, hospital bills another time, trips that were necessary, crises that were never planned but always landed on her. Zola looked around the table. No one reacted to the amount. No one flinched. That silence said everything. They were calm because they believed the solution already existed. And it did. It was sitting quietly in Zola's clutch. She pressed her fingers together, feeling the smooth edge of the bag. She thought about how that emergency account was supposed to be shared, but had slowly become hers alone. How no one checked the balance. How no one asked how it was funded. They only trusted it would work, because it always had. Zola breathed slowly, her face still soft, her posture relaxed. On the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, clarity settled in. The number wasn't shocking because it wasn't new. What was new was how tired she felt of being prepared for everyone else. The cards rested silently in her clutch, waiting. For the first time, Zola understood that choosing which one to use would change more than just the bill. Ebony sat comfortably in her chair, scrolling through the menu like nothing on it could surprise her. She called the waiter back with an easy smile and added another dish, then another, saying it was for the table. Her voice was light, confident, almost playful. She laughed as if money was a small detail, something that always worked itself out. The waiter nodded and wrote everything down without question. As the food arrived, Ebony talked more. She spoke about a trip she wanted to take soon, somewhere warm and expensive. She talked about upgrading their car, changing the furniture, and moving to a better place next year. Her plans flowed one after another, smooth and sure. She spoke like these things were already decided, like the future was guaranteed and waiting for her. Zola listened quietly. She had heard this tone before. It was the sound of safety that came from never having to check the ground before stepping forward. Ebony never mentioned budgets or limits. She never paused to calculate. Stability, to her, felt natural, like air. Each time Ebony added something to the order, Zola noticed how no one reacted. No warning looks. No hesitation. Everyone simply accepted it. Zola realized that Ebony's confidence did not come from what she had built herself. It came from trust in a system that had always saved her without being seen. Zola thought about the times she had delayed her own plans. The trips she canceled. The things she told herself could wait. She remembered sitting alone, moving money quietly, telling herself it was temporary. She had done it to keep things smooth, to avoid stress, to protect the family's image. And because she never complained, her effort had become invisible. Ebony laughed again, lifting her glass, joking about how life should be enjoyed. People nodded, smiling. Zola smiled too, but her eyes stayed thoughtful. She realized something painful and clear. Her sacrifices had blended into the background so completely that they were no longer recognized as sacrifices. They were expected. The more Ebony spoke about the future, the clearer it became. These plans were built on an assumption that Zola would always be there to catch anything that fell. Ebony did not see Zola as support anymore. She saw stability as something that simply existed. Zola watched her sister-in-law closely, not with anger, but with understanding. Ebony's confidence was real, but it was borrowed. It rested on years of quiet effort from someone who had never been asked how much it cost her. And in that moment, Zola finally saw how invisible she had allowed herself to become. Ebony stood up from the table to take a call, excusing herself with a quick smile. Her chair slid back, and the space she left behind felt louder than before. Conversation continued, but Zola noticed the shift. This was a rare moment when no one was watching her closely. The waiter moved away. Glasses were refilled. Time slowed in a quiet, steady way. Zola rested her hands on her lap and finally opened her clutch. Inside, the two cards sat where they always did. One represented her own life, her plans, her future. The other carried years of silent responsibility. She looked at them without rushing, without fear. There was no rush because this moment had been building for a long time. She thought about all the times she had promised herself it would be the last time. The last emergency. The last quiet rescue. Each time, something new came up, and she stepped in again. Not because she was weak, but because she cared. Because she believed keeping peace was worth the cost. Over time, that cost had grown heavy. Zola took a slow breath. There was no anger in her chest. No desire to embarrass anyone. What she felt was calm, deep and clear. This was not a reaction to tonight. Tonight was only the place where everything finally met. She removed the card connected to the shared emergency account and placed it back into the deeper part of her clutch. Then she pulled out her personal card and set it gently where the other one had been. The movement was simple, careful, final. Her fingers were steady, not because she was brave in that moment, but because she had already lived this decision many times in her head. Around her, laughter continued. Her brother was distracted, scrolling on his phone. No one noticed what had just changed, and that felt right. Zola did not need an audience for this. She did not need approval. As she closed the clutch, a strange lightness settled over her. Not relief exactly, but alignment. For the first time in years, her actions matched her truth. She was no longer preparing to save a situation that no one else took responsibility for. Zola leaned back in her chair, her posture relaxed. The hardest part had never been saying no out loud. It had been accepting that she was allowed to choose herself without explaining why. Tonight, she did not owe anyone a warning or a speech. Silence had always been her language, and now she was using it differently. When Ebony returned, still smiling, nothing on the surface had changed. The table looked the same. The mood felt the same. But Zola knew better. The quiet decision had already been made. And once a boundary is set in silence, it does not need to announce itself to be real. The server returned quietly, holding a small black folder in his hands. He placed it gently at the center of the table, right between the plates and glasses. The movement was simple, but it changed the air. Conversation slowed. Someone stopped laughing halfway. Forks rested back on plates. For a brief moment, everyone looked at the folder like it was just another part of the dinner. Ebony reached for it with ease. Her face showed no worry, no hesitation. This was a moment she had lived many times before. Even if she never handled it herself. She opened the folder and glanced at the total. 265,000 rubles. Her expression did not change. She smiled slightly, like the number was expected, like it confirmed the kind of life she believed she was living. She pulled out the card she thought was hers and handed it to the server without looking around. The table stayed relaxed. Someone picked up their glass again. Another person leaned back in their chair. No one questioned anything. This part was supposed to be smooth. The server inserted the card into the machine and waited. The small screen lit up. Seconds passed. The quiet grew heavier, but still no one felt nervous. Ebony was already talking again, saying something about dessert, waving her hand like the bill was already handled. Then the machine made a soft sound. The server looked down at it, then looked up politely. He cleared his throat gently and said the card had been declined. At first, Ebony laughed. She waved it off and said the machine must be wrong. Her laugh was light, almost playful. She told the server to try again. The server nodded and repeated the process. The table stayed quiet now. Eyes slowly returned to the center. The machine beeped again. Declined. Ebony's smile froze. She sat up straighter, her confidence slipping just enough to be noticed. She checked the card, turning it over as if something might have changed. She joked again, but the sound came out thinner this time. Someone across the table shifted uncomfortably. The server waited, calm and professional. Ebony's fingers tightened around the card. She glanced around the table, confused. This was not how it was supposed to go. The silence stretched long and awkward. Zola sat still, her hands resting calmly in her lap. She did not look surprised. She did not move. The room, once full of confidence, now felt exposed. In that moment, it became clear that the certainty everyone relied on had cracks. And for the first time that night, the safety they assumed was no longer guaranteed. Ebony laughed again, louder this time, trying to push the moment away. She joked about the machine being old, about technology always failing at the worst times. Her voice filled the space, but it did not fix the silence. The laughter stayed only on the surface. Under it, something uneasy began to show. She asked the server for a moment and pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved quickly as she checked her balance, her smile slowly fading. She tried another card, handing it over with a casual shrug, as if this was still nothing. The machine declined again. A small line appeared on her forehead. The table stayed quiet, every sound suddenly clear. Ebony stood up slightly from her chair and stepped aside, making a quick call. Her voice dropped lower now, no longer playful. She turned her back to the table, whispering explanations, asking questions. When she returned, she forced another smile, but it did not reach her eyes. She said there must be a delay, that money was on the way. No one replied. The confidence she carried earlier began to crack. Her hands moved restlessly. She avoided eye contact. Someone at the table cleared their throat. Another person checked the time. The comfort she once wore so easily started slipping off, piece by piece. The server waited patiently, but the pause stretched longer. Ebony made another call, this time sounding sharper, more urgent. She nodded to herself, repeating phrases that felt empty even as she said them. The picture she had painted all evening, of ease and abundance, no longer matched what was happening in front of everyone. Slowly attention shifted. One by one, eyes moved away from Ebony and toward Zola. Not because Zola said anything. Not because she moved, but because some people were beginning to understand. They remembered past moments. Other dinners. Other situations that ended smoothly without explanation. Zola felt the looks but did not lift her head. She stayed calm, her expression steady. She was not enjoying the moment. There was no pride in it. Only truth. Ebony noticed the shift and followed the direction of their gazes. She looked at Zola, confusion written clearly on her face. It was not anger yet. It was realization beginning to form. A realization that comfort had not appeared from nowhere. That stability had been borrowed, not built. The room felt smaller now. What had started as a simple delay had turned into exposure. Not loud, not dramatic, just clear. The story Ebony had been living no longer matched the reality unfolding at the table. And for the first time, she was being asked to stand inside that gap, with no one quietly stepping in to close it for her. The silence sat heavy on the table, and for the first time, Zola felt everyone waiting. Not for the machine. Not for Ebony. For her. She lifted her head slowly and met their eyes. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm and steady. There was no anger in it. No blame. I didn't refuse to help, she said softly. I just stopped being assumed. The words landed. Quietly, but they changed the air. Zola continued, still composed. She explained how this moment was not sudden. How it was built from many small moments that looked harmless on the surface. Times when money was short and she stepped in. Times when plans were made, and she filled the gap without being asked. Times when problems disappeared because she made them disappear. She spoke about how she stayed quiet to keep peace, how she paid without announcing it, how she fixed things so no one would worry. She said she did it because she cared, because family mattered to her. But over time, care turned into expectation. Help turned into habit, and habit turned into entitlement. No one interrupted her. Forks stayed still. Glasses remained untouched. Some faces showed shock. Others showed guilt. A few looked away. Zola did not raise her voice. She did not point fingers. She simply told the truth. I was never asked if I could, she said. It was just assumed I would. The table shifted. Chairs creaked softly as people adjusted uncomfortably. Someone sighed. Someone else folded their hands tightly. Ebony sat frozen, her expression unreadable, listening in a way she never had before. Zola explained that she had covered more than bills. She had covered stress, fear, and consequences. She had smoothed over moments that could have forced honesty. By staying silent, she had protected everyone else from discomfort, while carrying it herself. She paused, letting the words settle. Then she added, "I didn't stop because I don't care. I stopped because I do." That was all she said. No long speech. No explanation beyond that. She did not defend herself further. She did not wait for approval. The quiet that followed was different from before. It was heavier, realer. People were no longer confused about the bill. They were uncomfortable with the truth behind it. Zola leaned back slightly, her role finally changing. She had spoken once, clearly, and that was enough. What shifted at the table was not just the situation, but the story everyone had been telling themselves about her. The words Zola had spoken hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. The table no longer felt like a celebration. It felt raw, tense, like a curtain had been pulled back on something everyone had ignored. People shifted in their seats, unsure where to look, what to say. Faces that had been smiling moments ago now carried suspicion, guilt, or defensiveness. Her brother frowned first, leaning back in his chair. "Zola, why are you doing this now?" he asked, his tone a mix of irritation and confusion. "You're ruining the moment." A few others nodded, whispering under their breath, repeating the same idea. To them, the night had been about celebration, laughter, and appearances. Zola had changed all of that with calm honesty. But others looked differently. Their eyes softened as they recalled quiet acts, small rescues, and endless times Zola had stepped in without acknowledgement. Slowly, realization began to spread. They understood the moment they had been enjoying wasn't free. It had been built on someone else's constant effort, on her silence and sacrifice. What they had called smooth and natural now appeared deliberate, heavy with responsibility that wasn't theirs. Ebony remained frozen in her chair, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. She had always assumed stability was hers to enjoy, never thinking about the hands that had kept it in place. Now as she looked at Zola, she saw the truth in her calm expression. She saw the years of unpaid attention, the invisible work, the quiet endurance. She could no longer ignore it. The atmosphere at the table split. Some continued to see Zola as a disruptor, blaming her for the awkwardness, for the pause in conversation, for the shadow cast over the celebration. Others finally saw the dependence they had relied on without thinking, realizing how much had been taken for granted. It was clear, unspoken but undeniable. The lines in the family had shifted. Roles that were assumed had been challenged. Comfort that had been invisible was now visible. Privilege that had been taken for granted now demanded acknowledgement. Ebony was no longer just the confident woman at the table. She had to face reality. The support she had always received had limits, and those limits were now defined by Zola. By the time the murmurs settled, everyone understood something had changed. This dinner, once simple, had redrawn the boundaries. Family lines, once unquestioned, were now seen in full color, and no one could pretend otherwise. The bill was finally taken care of, but not by Zola. Someone else stepped in, fumbling a little, whispering apologies, trying to fix what she had quietly revealed. Plates of dessert arrived, but Zola didn't wait. She slid her clutch under her arm, stood up slowly, and smiled softly at her brother and Ebony. No angif, no drama, just calm, steady certainty. As she walked toward the door, her steps felt lighter than they had in years. Every small weight she had carried, the expectations, the quiet fixes, the constant yes, felt like it was falling away behind her. For the first time, she wasn't saving anyone. For the first time, she was saving herself. She paused at the door for a moment, glancing back at the table. Faces were still, caught between discomfort and realization. She didn't need them to apologize. She didn't need anyone to clap or praise her. What she had done was not for show. It was not revenge. It was something far simpler, far stronger, a boundary. A limit drawn clearly, silently, and permanently. Outside, the cool night air wrapped around her, and she breathed in deeply, enjoying the space, the freedom, the clarity. Inside, the family sat in a quiet tension, feeling the absence of the person who had always been their invisible support. The dynamic had shifted, subtly but irrevocably. No one could go back to assuming she would always be there. As Zola walked away, she thought about the years she had allowed herself to fade into the background. Tonight had changed that. The choice she had made was quiet, yet it resonated louder than anything she could have shouted. The room behind her no longer held the same power over her. By the time she disappeared into the street, the lesson had already taken hold. The family's patterns, the unspoken expectations, the comfort built on her silence. All of it had been challenged. From that night forward, nothing in the family worked the same way again. They had seen the line she would not cross, and even if they didn't say it, they knew it was real. Zola didn't need applause, and she didn't want it. What mattered was that she had chosen herself. That choice alone, quiet and firm, was enough to change everything.